Hello again, this is Umbra, Lord of the Rees, Master of Autism, and the Scourge of Chicken Tendies. Today's episode is going to be separated by chapters since people are going to be at various levels of familiarity with the situation. I felt it important to give people less familiar some more basic information and work my way up. I will start with an introduction to the situation, address the claims that there was no censorship, and lastly, I will cover the recent patch and controversy. If you are familiar with the situation already, please feel free to bounce around the chapters for the parts that interest you. And as always, if you feel I have earned it, please like and subscribe. Okay, so what happened? On April 21st, 2024, Stellar Blade released an announcement that it would be uncensored in all areas. This was, of course, celebrated by many people as they looked forward to an uncut game that included everything that was promised. There was some issue with it as the hard R controversy hit on April 23rd, 2 days later. It was to be fixed as if it needed to be fixed as part of the Day 1 patch. Fast forward to release day, April 26, 2024, and the Day 1 patch did indeed include the hard R fix, but it also included a number of other, more serious signs of censorship, as several of the outfits were interestingly changed to specifically de-emphasize mature aspects, which paying customers found to be a problem as they were told the game would be uncensored. This would have been excusable, potentially, had the original uncensored outfits not been included in the game as released on disc. This led to people getting upset and a campaign to protest it was launched. Interestingly enough, the campaign was not to tank review scores for the game, nor was it to boycott the game's success. If anything, individuals wanted to support Shift Up while taking aim at who was perceived to be the real reason. The ire was instead aimed to harm Sony for forcing the censorship on the game, as the pressure that added the hard R fix came from Sony, and it was the same fix that included these other measures. There are many signs that parts of the censorship were done last minute, as seams in the models and textures not being applied properly seem out of place coming from a studio that is as passionate about fashion as they are beautiful looking characters. Sony also has a long history of censoring games, sometimes to the point of canceling them in the case of Senran Kagura. I will be including a link to a full list of every game Sony was involved in censoring in the description. There's a lot of sources on these actions, and I encourage you to look them up as well, as YouTube sometimes doesn't like me including external links. You might have to copy and paste the URL. Anyway, you can also tag me on X, and I will happily provide additional receipts as required. The campaign was instead launched to cancel PlayStation Plus subscriptions, which was not a small number of cancellations, and a petition was launched to ask for the changes to be reverted and be sent to both Shift Up and Sony. Now, the efficacy of a petition could be debated, but the point of petitions are not necessarily to get the changes demanded. Think of it like a big ask. The point is that you have a large number of signatures that show people do care about this. It helps to prevent you from simply being disregarded as a small minority, and maybe something they will keep in mind in future decisions. Even if nothing happens, the fact of the matter is that if you are sick of the censorship, you should at least do it to give a middle finger to the powers that be. I mean, it might mean nothing. If so, you lose about 2 seconds, but it could do something, even things you don't expect. With a roll of the dice like that, what do you have to lose? This brings me to the second part of this video, counterclaims. I wish to address the counterclaims. Some have some merit, most do not. The most standard response to people criticizing the censorship revolves around appeals to triviality and false equivalencies. both of them are disingenuous framings of arguments and rarely delivered in good faith. Sophistry is the word for using fallacious arguments to try to bait an opponent into an indefensible position and is generally deployed by those who want to push their point or beliefs at all costs. It's already an argument in bad faith, so I don't generally recommend engaging with them, aside from calling them out on their logical fallacies, and demand they come at you with an argument you can't refute with a mere JPEG. Or just not come at you with an argument at all if they can't just, beat a picture. The counterclaim I want to address revolves around the interview on the 29th of April 2024. It is in Korean, so I will have to rely on translation software. If there is anyone who happens on this video and does speak Korean, please reach out to me if I got anything wrong. The Google Translate brings up the excerpt that has been widely circulated as, quote, the final result is after the day 1 patch. The final result of adjustments to be delivered to users is included in the day 1 patch, or just before it. I don't think that just because costumes are vulgar doesn't necessarily mean they're good, so this is something that was modified for quality. As a result, there are parts where eroticism is lessened or emphasized. This is the final product that we want to show as the intended result. That sounds quite definitive if you take it in a vacuum. However, there are several reasons I personally cannot take this statement at face value. First, Sony has a long history of censoring specifically Asian devs with heavy-handed censorship and then gagging them with NDAs. On top of that, Sony is a big player, an independent nation of its own, essentially. I went over that in the last video. Because of that, there are risks to openly opposing them than simply breaking an NDA, which, frankly, on its own, regardless of the reason you break an NDA, would make other publishers rather leery about you working with them. The second is that one has to consider corporate culture. Even in the United States, where we are notably more direct and blunt comparative to many Asian cultures, there is a separate language we use we call corporatese, which is a way of saying rude things in a way that are on their surface not rude to save face for both parties. Phrases like per my last email are considered rude in corporate culture. In the same interview as before, here are the following statements to consider. Question. There were teenage fans to see CEO Kim Hyung-tae, but they were not even allowed to enter the event venue. I think the age limit is something that can be adjusted, but I wonder if there was any intention to target a wider audience when making the game. And CEO Kim Hyung-tae, please forgive my pronunciation, correct me in the comments if I'm wrong. Of course, this is something I was worried about. As the age group of the game decreases, the scope of inclusion expands. To be honest, this title is aimed at 19+ action and an unstoppable experience, just like I said 5 years ago. Since this game was made for adults, I think there was a lot more that could be shown. The age of this title was determined by its purpose. If you allow teenagers to enjoy an event or game, you as a producer have neglected to manage the subject. We had no choice but to provide no guidance to teenagers. However, this is not aimed only at adult-rated games. In fact, Goddess of Victory Nikke is rated for ages 15 and up, and we are trying to prepare games that even teenagers can enjoy, depending on the types of console games that are released in the future. Yes, that's right. They consider this to not be too vulgar for teenagers. In the same interview where the uncensored bunny suit was vulgar. Yes, this company. The company that does this. And this. We are supposed to believe that the company that thinks this is okay for 15-year-olds thought that this was too vulgar for 19 plus?
Right.
More interestingly were these excerpts. Question. I think console games will be included in the game industry promotion policy. From the perspective of a leader in console games development that is producing good results globally, is there any infrastructure support you would like to see provided throughout the gaming industry? CEO Kim Hyung-tae responded, government infrastructure support is important, but more important than anything, I think, the market, users, and developers all need to re-examine what we enjoy. What I would like to ask the government to do is to give a degree of freedom by focusing on culture rather than products. Since games are cultural products, there are many interpretations of freedom. But what I am arguing for is closer to freedom of expression. I hope that restrictions will be removed so there can be sympathy around the world. I would like to encourage game developers and us to continue to work hard to create games that will work in the global market. If only one type of genre is developed, it may all disappear. So I hope the government and developers will help to create a variety of games. A further question reads, you mentioned creative freedom earlier. Accordingly, is there anything you were unable to express or draw in this work? CEO responds, I thought it was important to minimize the constraints on creation. I'm going to stop real fast and point this out. He is complaining about constraints on creation, an interesting thing to say if there weren't any from Sony. Continuing, in every country, deliberation exists, and I think it is positive to thoroughly distinguish between age groups that can play through deliberation. However, recently, adult ratings should be based on the assumption that adults will play. There is a tendency to review based on the premise that youth will play. It is important to apply these aspects properly, but I thought it would be good to give some freedom so as to not limit the content. These are very interesting things to say considering the controversy. If Sony did not censor him, why was he the one to bring up and focus on creative expression first? This came up earlier in the interview than the first quote I mentioned, and the one the games press have been bandying around as proof that Sony wasn't involved in any censorship, even though they released an article saying Sony censored. Why would he be talking about this specifically if he wasn't? The part where he mentioned specifically that adult ratings should assume adults will play especially sticks out. To me, the subtext is screaming. Thinking as someone who cannot outwardly say that he was censored, to focus on this in response to questions specifically are not an off-the-cuff or random choice. Applying Occam's razor, the simplest answer to the question of why focuses on this in particular. In this interview, Kim specifically talks about how mature-rated games should be allowed to be mature. It's very telling. If he wasn't dealing with these interactions from Sony, why would he even mention this? There's also this very interesting gem in the April 15th, 2024 IGN interview between IGN CEO Kim Hyung-tae and Yoko Taro, who, if people are not familiar with, did Nier Automata. Question. Mr. Yoko, it has been said that you are well known for your unique vision as a developer. This was very apparent in Drakengard, your first project as director. Was it a long road to become a director? Yoko responds, actually, the person that was directing it at the time became busy with another project. I was asked to take over, so reaching the position of director happened quite naturally. At the time, Square Enix asked me to make a game like Dynasty Warriors, but set in a fictional world. I thought that would be challenging to pull off, but since I was getting paid, I said, I'll do it. There weren't any instructions for the world setting and scenario, so I simply did what I wanted in those areas. I think this resulted in a quite unique product. It was a very dark scenario, and I remember being asked why this was necessary. In the end, between Yoko and Square Enix, it ended in a fight. Speaking of which, Mr. Kim, I wanted to ask you if there were any fights with Sony Interactive Entertainment since they are publishing Stellar Blade. Kim glances at the staff members in the room before laughing and says, "The people at SIE are ... very, very nice." Yoko responds to that with, "SIE's staff members are pulling faces I've never seen before. I wish the readers of this article could see it." This altogether points to a picture that is very hard to dismiss. This brings us to the recent patch. The May 24th update brought less censored variants of 2 of the outfits in question, leading to some calling it an absolute win and others a defeat. There are signs that the outfits were toned down, as Yogensha on X pointed out. With a reduced transparency on some of the outfits, my view is more in the middle. As we are undeniably being heard, at the same time, there's a tenuous situation with Sony. And remember, the new CEO doesn't officially take over until June 1st, meaning that all of the people that are still making those publishing decisions are still in power at least until June 1st. So there appear to be some lingering situations to step around. I will praise the step in the right direction. However, my PlayStation Plus will remain canceled until the demands of restoration of the censored content are met. I'm not deluded. I know this is not a total victory, but we took a hill, and we deserve to cheer for that as we push harder. The salt about it, and the strange alignment between people unhappy that not everything demanded was met, and this Kotaku article are, well, kind of activates the brain almonds, don't it? Well, I hope this video has been informative for you, as I had very little time to put this together. And as you can see, I'm experimenting with some different things and different approaches. Please feel free to toss some feedback into the comments, and if you feel I earned it, like, subscribe, and share the video. I will point out that it's very common that people will try to shame you for caring about really anything. And to be honest, it's not uncool to care. You should care. Passion is nothing to be ashamed of. And with that, I wish you all a good weekend.